Okay, John chapter 14, I'm going to read the first 6 verses as a way of getting into our topic today. Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and at one point he says this: "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house it has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going." Thomas, who was one of the disciples, then chimed in, says, "Thomas said to him, 'Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way?' Then Jesus answered, 'I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.'" At which point, if you're not a Christian and you've walked through these doors today and you hear Jesus saying, "I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, no one comes to the Father except through me," you might be saying, now there it is. That's what really bothers me about Christianity. This idea that you've got this exclusive hold on truth, that you think that Jesus is the only way. And even if we're Christians, this is a challenging verse. Is this really what we think, that Jesus is the only way, that the only way someone will come to the Father, the only way someone will be saved is just through Jesus? What do we make of all that? I'd like to just sort of work through this problem because I think it's a real one and important. And I'm going to just do my best once I name it to do my best to talk about it from a Christian perspective and how Christians might respond. Just for the sake of getting into it, I'm going to put here on the screen these words that I think describe the problem that pluralism presents to us today. Something like this: there are many different religions in the world, all followed by many intelligent and educated people. Isn't it simply arrogant and narrow-minded to suggest that all of them, apart from Christianity, are wrong? Then someone might say, listen, I can see that believing in Christianity helps you, that it's true for you, but it's not true for me. Shouldn't everyone be free to choose his or her own belief? And a couple of quick thoughts, and then we're going to dive a little deeper into this whole objection. Very quickly, I think that there probably was a point in this world, in kind of even our own American history, where it was possible that Christians could sort of be sectioned off in a Midwestern town and never meet anyone from another religious tradition. And so it was easy maybe in those places to characterize people who are Muslims or Hindus or Buddhists or whatever. It was easy to characterize them as crazy people who were fools and uneducated or unintelligent, and just characterize what they said and just dismiss their whole basis or way of life. But now, of course, as society has opened up, travel has become more possible. Now we're coming together, and I know it's the case for me. I live on the same street. My next door neighbor across the street from me is not Christian. He's a Muslim man. And many of us, we know people, and it turns out as we meet them, all the characterizations that we otherwise might have thought in our mind aren't true. They're lovely people. They're very nice. They're moral, they're good people, they're sincere, they're loving, and now what? I'm a Christian. Do I really think they know nothing about God, that the way to eternal life is totally lost to them, or what? I think that's one thing. Now, let me say this. I'm about to dive into this problem and kind of ferret it out and talk about it even more, but I'm just going to tell you before I do that probably 2 quick things. One, of all the problems that we studied up till now, this problem probably has the weakest intellectual basis. In other words, when we really dive into it, you'll see that it's kind of built on a foundation of sand. It really has, at least from an intellectual standpoint, no water. But on the other hand, I would say that at least in our culture today, much of what's being said here is just sort of common sense. And even for a Christian, there's something here that has to grab our heart, and we ought to at least pay attention to and understand and know. So two things now, as we talk about this sort of pluralistic argument, there are probably two ways of digging down into it. Here's the first problem. Those who are now pluralistic, they'll say this: listen, Christianity is too narrow. And often this is called the doctrinal inessentiality objection. And those are big words. Let me explain what I mean. This is what pluralists say today. Listen, here's what we have figured out. Yes, there are a lot of different religions out there, but they're all pretty much the same at their core. Yes, individual religions sort of emphasize one doctrine or another, but setting that aside, all religions are pretty much the same. And they're about this: love, hope, finding peace. They're about this. Human beings are sort of naturally, for whatever reason, selfish and self-interested, and what religion does is it turns us away from our self-interestedness to become a more giving person and puts us in touch with the divine. And every religion out there does that. We ought not, therefore, to emphasize individual doctrines. So for Christians, just tamper down on Jesus is the Son of God and the only way. Buddhists, the fourfold path, that's fine for you, but it's not universal. Jews, stop emphasizing the 10 Commandments. Muslims, the 5 pillars. Just, hey, what we really need to do is de-emphasize all those things that are kind of individual and just recognize that, it's pretty much all the same. How could I draw closer to God? How could I become less selfish? How could I, in the midst of this world, find peace and love and hope? And, listen, at one point, Christians, you may have thought this was the only way to find it, but now you've met your Muslim neighbor or your Hindu neighbor or your Buddhist neighbor, and they seem to have peace and love and hope, and so just recognize you don't have a corner on the truth. Don't be so narrow. That's one way of articulating it. Here's the second type of objection that's often given. Maybe I'd call it the arrogance objection. The arrogance objection says something like this: listen, today, we live in a world where history ought to have taught us something by now. So, in the past, we've emphasized what's made us different. But look at what it's led to. In our arrogance, we think we have an exclusive hold on the truth. In their arrogance, they think they have an exclusive hold on the truth. And all it's done is cause people to go to war over the whole thing. And they say, hey, look, history should have taught us something by now, but even now, the stakes are higher. The weapons we have are so much more deadly. And so now that we can bomb each other with nuclear bombs, or there's chemical weapons or biological weapons, we've really got to cut this out. Stop thinking you're better than they are, and they need to stop thinking they're better than you are, and we need to stop converting each other, and we need to just settle down. Stop emphasizing our differences, start emphasizing our unity. And so those of you who are going out with this mind to convert others or prove that they're wrong and say that you have an exclusive hold on the truth, who are you? You're the problem. Stop being so arrogant. Other people know things as well. And instead of emphasizing what makes us different, we need to find our common humanity. Anyway, don't you agree? This is what our world is telling us today. And I might as well say this. I think there's something here that, okay, in just a minute, I'm going to do what I said. I'm going to explain to you that as an intellectual objection, this is probably the weakest of all those that we found. I'll probably show you that it's built on a bed of quicksand quickly, and I hope you'll grasp and agree with me that intellectually, okay, this is really not that profound, but in a common sense way, I think we ought to listen. Pride, arrogance, believing that we have this corner on the truth and that everyone else is inferior because they don't. The pluralist is telling us there's a problem there, and if we try to build society like that, we're in trouble. And here's what I want to do. One, I do want to show you that this objection is, at least intellectually, not that rigorous, easy to overcome. But then two, I'm going to do something even more difficult, maybe. if we can get there. I'm going to try my very best, and I'll do it as humbly as I possibly can, to say, listen, that impulse you have for peace, to stop the pride, to stop the arrogance, the only place you'll find a resource for that actually is right here in Jesus. And anyway, let's get to the first part. So here's the argument. All religions are basically the same. It's arrogant of you, Christian, to keep on claiming that you have this exclusive hold on the truth, and you ought to just set that aside. But, and this is where I'll get to how I think it's built on quicksand, here's the thing. Pluralism itself is a religious belief that covertly is trying to persuade others that it is more right than all the other views. Let me explain. First of all, pluralism is a belief. Just like Christianity is a belief, just like Islam is a belief, just like Hinduism is a belief, just like Buddhism is a belief. This is a belief. It's not built on anything scientific. There's no kind of empirical evidence that said this is right. It's a belief, and it's a religious belief because it's a belief about God and the supernatural and the divine. What it's basically saying is that, listen, Christianity has it wrong, Hinduism has it wrong, Buddhism has it wrong, Judaism has it wrong, Islam has it wrong. They all have it wrong. This is a religious belief. God, although Christians say their God is God, and God is really all the same for all these religions, and I know something about religion that they don't, namely that they're all the same. It's a religious belief. And that is a belief that's trying to persuade others that is more right than the others, I think goes without saying. So Christians are saying, listen, the only way is this way, and Islam is saying the only way is this way, and Hindus are saying the only way is this way, and pluralism comes in and they're saying, no, you don't understand God at all. We know something about God, and you're all wrong, we're more right. And do you see how that just defeats itself? It's trying to tell Christians they shouldn't evangelize. It's trying to tell Muslims they shouldn't persuade, while it itself is trying to persuade us that it's more right than we are. And so the problem is still there. It claims not to be arrogant, but it's more arrogant. I know better than you. It tries to say it's not narrow, but it's its own narrowness, masquerading as wideness. It's its own narrowness, saying all those ones are wrong. This is the only right way. And so intellectually, I think you can see it actually kind of crumbles in on itself, and it's self-defeating to make these kind of claims that, pluralism's the only one that has it right, and all of you should set aside your doctrines for our doctrines, our teaching. That's the intellectual side. Now, the taller order. Because even if you can just see what I now said, that intellectually it has all the same problems it's trying to solve in everyone else, even if you can see that it's self-defeating, you still say, yeah, but that's just a mind game. That's just a mental trick. Isn't the impulse basically right? We live in a world right now that, all the wars that there has been are caused by, and the stakes are higher now. We need peace. We've got to stop emphasizing things like what we read here, Jesus saying, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. So that's a taller order. Let's get at the common sense thing, and here's what I'm going to try to show you. I'm going to try to argue and persuade you that Christianity is the only system of beliefs that ultimately has any hope or can solve the problem of pride, of arrogance, of humanity. In other words, Christianity is not just something that's meant to be personal and private, that it's the only thing that can fix what's there in the public square. And there's a real problem in the public square. And I'm going to try to show you that pluralism can't do it, and no other religion can do it, only Christianity can do it. And so I realize I have a tall order. Here's how I'd like to get started. I'd like to just explain to you this. Why Christians believe that Jesus is the perfect solution to salvation. Let me start here. First of all, When we read these words, Jesus saying, I'm the way, the truth, the life, no one comes to the Father except through me. If you're a Christian, I hope you know this, that Christians do not believe we are the only ones who have a corner on any truth. In fact, as Christians, we really believe that there's a truth. Much of the truth is just widely known by everyone. And so I want to start by just acknowledging that if you're a Christian, then one of the things you believe is that you're not the only one with truth. In fact, truth is spread widely and understood by a lot of people, even people of other religions. There's a certain amount of truth that everyone knows. Let me explain. Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. That psalm goes on to say this, day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. In fact, it says their voice goes out to the ends of the earth. Here's what that psalm is saying. You look up at the stars at night. You look at a sunset. You look at a beautiful landscape. You look even at your own hand and its fingerprint. Through those things, God is speaking. Not just occasionally, but day after day, night after night. And he's speaking and telling us something, that he exists. Romans chapter 1 says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and his divine nature, says, have been clearly seen, being understood from what's been made, so that men are without excuse. Every person, regardless of race, regardless of background, regardless of location, every person, the Bible says, knows something very important, that God exists. Here's what we as human beings know. We know that this physical world is not all there is. We know that there's a divine. We know that there's something supernatural. We know there's something that goes beyond the bounds of what we see in this fleshly reality. Every single human being, and by the way, some of us, as we walk through these doors today, you say, well, I don't believe that. And it's true. The Bible actually says that there's some of us who suppress that truth. In fact, Romans 1 is all about how some people just try to ignore it. But here's the thing. We know. We know. For one thing, God's given us a witness. It's inside our own mind, in our own heart. It's called a conscience. Something telling us, listen, there's good and bad. There's right and wrong. There is a witness not only out there in the world, but even inside. And I believe there's not a single person who doesn't know. In fact, the history of the world tells us this. There's nowhere you can go where people didn't believe in the supernatural and the divine. Every single person, Here, I'd like to tell you a story. So my wife and I were missionaries in Nigeria. And at one point, it was actually at Christmas time, coming up in the time frame we're about to come into, we took a trip to the northern part of Nigeria to a region called Kambari. And it so happens that we went to a village there that up to just a few years ago was virtually untouched by any outside world. Here's the proof of that. When our missionaries rode up to their villages in motorcycles, that was the first time they ever saw the wheel. Now you think about this. This is a civilization that's ancient, and up to this point they had not invented the wheel, which means that they must not have seen anything outside of themselves, because you can't go very far and people have wheels. But in their society they had not invented the wheel. They were still farming with rocks over their heads. They had no tools. They had the Bronze Age. They hadn't had the Iron Age. They were literally using rocks over their heads to till the soil. And what that tells me is there's been absolutely no outside influence. Not like someone came up and said, hey, these are the things you need to know. This is a self-existing culture that had basically been framed out from the rest of the world. And guess what? As I was walking around the village, I was looking, and up in the trees at nearly every house, guess what was there? They were taking some of their crops, and they were offering sacrifices. What I'm saying is this: no matter who you are, where you're from, what tribe, what race, what location, it's obvious to every person, it always has been, there is a God. And the fact that they were offering sacrifices points out the second thing every single human being knows. Every single human being knows that there's a God, and every single human being knows that we have a problem with him, or he has a problem with us. One way we know that is our consciences. God's left us a witness telling us what's right and wrong, good and bad. And even though we know, all of us have felt the sting of our conscience accusing us, telling us, hey, what you're doing right now is not right. Now, some of us have gotten very good at basically telling our conscience, be quiet. Right? I mean, we have. But the truth of the matter is, it's like a witness that's in there. We know that we don't live up to the standards that, the divine has set for us. One of the reasons in this village they're offering sacrifices is because there's a problem. They knew, right? No one needed to tell them there's a problem between God and us, and we better do something to fix this problem. And let me say this. The fact that there are all kinds of religions across the face of this planet tells us that those two truths are obvious to everyone. There would not be any religions if people did not think there's a God. The fact that there are so many religions should tell us, hey, all of us realize this. There's a God. And the fact there are so many religions points out the truth that all of us intuitively and understand without reservation, we know this, that there's a problem between us and God. If there was no problem, there'd be no need for any kind of religion. There's all kinds of religions saying, okay, there's a distance between you and God. Here's what you need to do. Here's the answer. Every religion accepts those two truths, and every religion has some prescription to solve that basic problem. And as Christians, we don't need to pretend that we have an exclusive corner on that truth. All people know that. Regardless of race, background, everyone realizes that. So now, to kind of turn the corner, because there's a God, because he has a problems with us, Christianity says this: Jesus is the perfect solution to salvation. He's exactly what's needed. And I'll come at this, if I can, two different ways. First, I'd like to come at it by talking about the requirements to be the deliverer of sinful humans. And I'll just put it this way. If there might be someone who can deliver us, who can save us, what would be required of that person? And let's just talk this through. So if in fact there's a God, one of the things we know because of our conscience, is because we've had this sort of moral order pushed down on us, is that he's good. He's far better than we. In fact, he's the epitome of good. And that must mean that he's just as well. And even from our own feeble and frail idea of justice, there's some things that we know. And here's what we know. If there's a punishment to be meted out, in other words, if someone's guilty of something, you can't punish someone else for what they've done. So there's no culture, there's no place where someone commits a crime or violates, decency, and they say, well, you shouldn't have done that, and now you have to suffer. That's just not what justice is. Everyone knows this simple maxim of justice: he who does the crime does the time. And since, if there is a God, he must be at least as just as we are, it only stands to reason that because human beings are the ones who have caused the problem, and that's obvious, then human beings are the ones who would have to pay the price, so to speak. And so if you were looking for a deliverer, someone to deliver sinful human beings, you would have to look for someone who's fully human. A human being, it would have to be a human being who would be our Savior. But, and now let me put it this way, it would have to be a human being who is without sin. And let me try to explain that. And Ed, you always sit here in the front, so I'm going to pick on you. I don't choose that for you. You choose that for yourself. So this is possible that I have to choose someone. And so thanks for being a good sport. Let's just say, all right, God's a judge, and eventually he's going to judge the universe. And so all of us at some point or another, if God's going to set everything straight, are going to face him. And I'm a sinful human being, and Ed is willing to admit he's a sinful human being. And so here we're going to get to the final judgment. And let's just say that Ed goes before me. And Ed is there. He's in the presence of a perfectly good God who's morally upright, who's totally righteous. And, he has not lived the way God wanted. He's violated his own conscience. He's violated God's law. And so there he stands in the presence of this awesome God. He falls to his knee, realizing he's doomed. And because we've known each other, let's say I'm there, we're all in line, and I'm watching on. And because I've known Ed for so long, and he's been a part of our church, and we've come to love each other, let's just say that somehow in my heart I was just moved with compassion, and I didn't want Ed to suffer the fate that he naturally needs to, and so I stood up and I said, hold on, punish me instead. You know what God's going to say, right? He's going to say, hey, sit back down and wait your turn. I've got my own problems with you. And, okay, human beings have sinned, so a goat or a sheep, an elephant, some other creature can't pay the crime. Human beings do. But sinful human beings like me aren't qualified. Only someone who's sinless would be qualified. But now, let's turn it around, because I think there's something more we could say. Let's just say now that I'm there, I'm on trial, but let's say Ed had in fact lived a sinless life. And so I was there before God, and I've fallen to my knees, and Ed's moved with compassion. He's never sinned even one time. It might be that he'd be able to raise his hand and say, stop! I'll pay for Scott. And maybe because Ed's sinless, God would say, well, okay, come over here, and Scott would go free, and Ed would take the punishment. But guess what? The rest of you, you don't have an Ed now. Trust me, he'll stay very busy with my problems. Right? And so if we're looking for someone qualified to be a deliverer, not only would this person need to be fully human and without sin, but also fully divine. And listen, I don't know if you've done this before, but read through the New Testament. It goes out of its way to describe that this is exactly who Jesus was. He was a human being in every single way, every sense of the term. He was fully human. And the Bible goes out of its way to say he wasn't just, appearing like a human. He was human. He fully took on our flesh, had a body and soul, human. But also the Bible goes out of its way to say, listen, here's a person who never sinned even one time, which means he's qualified. He could stand up and say, hey, wait, I'll take the punishment. And if you read through the New Testament and the Bible, you'll also see the Bible goes out of its way to say also he was fully divine. He was totally God, which gave him an eternal capacity, not only to bear the weight of Scott's sin and Ed's sin, but the sin of many. Because he was divine, he could bear the weight beyond what any single human being possibly could. And because of that, he's totally qualified. And I guess I would just say this. Do you know or have you heard of any other human being who meets these qualifications? I think just reason, if you think about the case, the fact there's a good and just God tells us this is the kind of thing we would need. Have you heard of any other human being who fits that description? Maybe there's another way of getting at it. Why Jesus is the perfect solution to salvation. I call this a dilemma between divine justice and divine love. Now here's the thing. If you admit there's a God and that he's far beyond us, you'll have to see that he is the epitome of everything good. If we have a sense of justice, it must come from God. If we have a sense of love, it must come from God. Every good thing must come from his hand. And so since he's the epitome of both justice and love, he needs to be both totally just and totally loving. And now that we've gotten that far, I think this will help us see the case. So in our own human reality, let's just suppose that there's a man who's guilty of some heinous crime. First-degree murder, probably something even worse, whatever. So heinous that it's deserving of the death penalty. And let's just say that person, because this would need to be the case, our own sense of justice tells us, would have to appear before a judge. And as this person appears before a judge, is totally guilty, it'll be the judge's responsibility to lower the gavel and execute the punishment, in this case, the death penalty, because it's such a heinous crime. Some judge has to make that order. But let's say as this man walked into the courtroom, and it's this judge's responsibility, she looked out. And as she looked out, she realized she recognizes this criminal because it's her own son. I would say she would be caught in a dilemma. A dilemma on the one hand between justice, her job, and love, who she is. On the one hand, it's her job. If she just condones this crime and lets this person go, then she becomes complicit in the crime. It's her job. She must execute justice. She must lower that gavel and say, to the gallows or to the chair or whatever. She must do that. On the other hand, it's her son. She gave birth to this child. If love means anything, and she has it for this kid, she can't lower the gavel and say, you're going to die. She's got to condone, permit, let go. And I would say she'd be trapped between this obvious dilemma. On the one hand, her sense of justice demands that she execute a penalty. On the other hand, her sense of love demands that she not put him to death, and either you put him to death or you don't. I mean, it's one or the other. And so either her justice is going to be violated or her love is going to be violated. And I would just submit to you that's the situation we've put God in. We're his children. He created us. He loves us. We rebelled. We abandoned him. We've committed crimes against him. We've done horrible and heinous things. If he is just at all, we deserve to be punished. But if he's loving at all, he can't lower the death penalty on us. What's God supposed to do? And I just submit to you that the cross is the only thing I know that answers this dilemma between divine justice and divine love. Let me explain to you what happened here on the cross. God sent his one and only Son. God the Father sent God the Son to be a substitute. And what happened at the cross is this: God took all of my sin, every last sin I ever have or will commit. He took all your sin, every last sin you ever have or will commit, and he laid it on Jesus. For God so loved the world, he sent his one and only Son. Okay, and here's what happened. God punished him with the very punishment we deserve, with the punishment of hell itself. He poured out all his anger. He poured out all his wrath. He punished Jesus in the most horrible and heinous way with the punishment that you and I deserve. Justice was executed. At the same time, because he was fully divine, it's like he could swallow up all the punishment for that sin and still emerge on the other side victorious, still with life. And as a result of that, because he defeated sin and death, now God in love has rescued us and set us free and saves us. And so we can be brought back into a relationship with him. It's only here that God can possibly solve this dilemma between justice and love. Both can be held out. Both can be raised up. It's not that love wins and justice loses. It's not that justice wins and love loses. Both vindicated totally. Justice fully done. Love fully enacted. And it's because of that, as far as I can tell, Jesus is the perfect solution to salvation. And I think just the nature of the problem, that there's a God, that we've offended him, would lead us to see that it's only someone who's fully human and fully divine that could possibly be qualified, and someone who would take the punishment in a way like this that could possibly solve the problem, which is why Christians believe that Jesus is the perfect solution to salvation. Now, that I've explained that, I'd like to talk about the significance of it. And I think, of all the things I'm going to say, this is probably the most helpful and the most profound and the most important. Christians agree, they believe that when Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me, they see how there's no one else who presents themselves. This is the only thing. This is where it's at. And yet, this is super important. I want to show you how if you surrender yourself at the foot of the cross and believe this, that Christianity is the only system of thought that solves the problem of arrogance and pride, and the only thought process that even has a chance at ushering in world peace. Let's see if I can explain it this way. When you stand at the foot of the cross there's something significant that you're doing. You are admitting that salvation comes through grace. I hope you know how profound that is. So, all the other religions in the world, they all know there's a God. They all know that we've offended him. But when it comes to salvation, instead of the onus being on God, the onus is now on us. And as far as I can tell, every other religion in the world says this, that salvation is going to come through effort, through your works. So in Islam, there are 5 pillars. Here's what you need to do. In Buddhism, there's a 4-fold path. Here's the path that you must follow. In other religions, there's a set of commandments. Do these things, don't do these things. There's effort that must be put in. By the way, if you read through all Buddha's words, you get to his very last ones. You know what they are? Strive without ceasing. You see, for every other religion, if there's going to be a salvation, it's us. We've caused a problem, we need to fix it. We need to strive without ceasing. The onus is on us. And let me tell you something. If in fact that's true, that the onus is on us, it will be very easy, if you're following the 5 pillars or the 4-fold path or these set of commandments, to look down at someone else and say, you're inferior, you're less than. Because of course, I'm striving, I'm putting in the effort, and you're the ones who are not, who are messing it all up. You see what I mean? If the onus is on us, it naturally leads to pride and arrogance. Why? Because I'm doing it, and they're not. It's only Christianity that says, no, you can't follow the commandments. There is no set of principles or pillars. There is no path that you can follow to attain salvation. When you stand at the foot of the cross, you know what you say? You say, God, I admit something. I am among the very worst sinners in the entire world, and I don't have what it takes to make my way back to you. I need you to rescue me. And when you do that, when you humble yourself and admit, I am among the very worst sinners in the world, when you look out and you see your Muslim or Hindu neighbors or whatever neighbors, you say, you know what? Not only is it likely the case, but probably is the case, that they're better people than I am. I'm a horrible, terrible sinner. And yeah, they probably are better people than me. They probably live better lives. By the way, if you're a Christian, that should not surprise you. Christianity says, I'm among the very worst. When you come to the foot of the cross, you say, I'm a terrible sinner. And so when you look out in the world, you expect there's going to be people that are much... Listen, if you don't know that, it's likely you're not a Christian. Of course, as you look out in the world, you're going to find people that you'll respect them. Let me tell you, it's at the heart of Christianity. James chapter 4, this verse is also found in the book of Proverbs. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Until you're willing to throw up your hand and say, I'm a rotten, no good sinner, I've messed it all up, I need salvation, you're not a Christian. All the other religions in the world, they pump you up, they puff you up, they make you think, I'm doing it, they're not. It's only Christians who say, they're doing it, I'm not. And you know what that does? Every person who finally agrees that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, they have to humble themselves. And so although they say, yes, there is only one truth, there is only one way, Jesus is the only answer, although we say that, we do it with a kind of humility. You know, Philippians chapter 2, it says, your mind should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. Consider others better than yourselves. It's only Jesus who didn't come to dominate, but to serve. And his true followers do exactly the same thing. We don't come to dominate, we come to serve. We're not filled with pride and arrogance, we're filled with loneliness and humility because we're the worst. I mean, there was no solution. The only solution was that God had to take it on himself. And if you walk through these doors today and you care about world peace, and I would guess most do, I would just humbly say it's only in this system of thought, Christianity, that we ever have a chance. People who have become so convinced that they're rotten sinners, so humble about the fact that they're the worst in the world, so needy of salvation that finally, in the public dialogue, we don't have people who are prideful and arrogant looking down on one another. We have people who are serving each other and are filled with humility and love. And that's why I just point out that Christianity only isn't meant something to be private. But we as Christians are saying, listen, to all those who follow a religion that's work-based, or to even those who are pluralists, who in their arrogance say, no, everyone has it wrong, we're the only ones who have it right, and you have to do what we're telling you. Christians are the only ones who say, listen, I'm got it all wrong, I screwed everything up, you guys are way better than I am, I can learn from you. That's the only basis, as far as I can tell, that our world will ever find peace, which is why Christians say, hey, Jesus, he's the Prince of Peace. And so if you walk through these doors today and you just haven't been sure whether to turn your life over to Jesus or not, I just urge you, not only for the sake of your own soul, but for the sake of humanity and this world, to come with me to the foot of the cross, to put your hand up in the air and say, I am the worst of sinners. I can't save myself. And I just bow my knees to Jesus. I bow my knees to the God who I've offended, and I accept his means of saving me.